You're listening to Dairy Voice by Dairy Business News, a podcast exclusively for the dairy industry.
One of our sponsors of the Dairy Voice podcast is National DHIA. NDHIA ensures information accuracy and represents their members' interests. They are the direct voice for the dairy information industry. To find out more, go to dhia.org. When your goal is to help animals reach their full potential, health matters. Diamond V offers a fresh perspective on animal health, a perspective that supports gut health, strengthens immunity, and ultimately enhances performance. For those who choose to invest in keeping healthy animals healthy, feeding Diamond V makes a statement about another dimension of profit, where margins are measured by confidence in your future. To get a fresh perspective, visit diamondv.com, because animal health deserves a healthier approach.
Well, Happy New Year and welcome to the newest edition of Showbox Sires series on the evolution of the great cow. Once again, we're introducing a new Showbox Sires bull, 744 HO 16956 Hendrix, who is now available through Select Sires and all their distributors around the world. Hendrix, for Mike and I, is one of our most exciting bulls that we've released to date yet at Showbox, because the bull combines so many great things, and we'll talk about them in this podcast. But for me, you put great cows together in this pedigree like none other. Doc and Della, Treasure and Tokyo, Chastity, Cheyenne. It's like a who's who of great cows in the past 2 decades in the breed. So to help us with that, we've got Mike Duckett, who's been involved with both sides of the pedigree of this bull. We also have Kevin Jorgensen, Senior Sire Analyst at Select Sires. And then it's a pleasure to welcome the master breeder from Waukon, Iowa, Frank Regan, who is the guy behind the great cow Della that started this whole family nearly 10 generations ago. So I welcome all three of you guys, and we're going to start, Mike, with you. You've said to many people this bull is one of the favorite bulls you've been involved with. Tell us why, Mike.
Well, as you said earlier, I've had a lot to do with both sides of this pedigree, and I'm confident with those two cow families, when we combine them together, we're going to get a cow that it's going to work for every dairyman in the world. Treasure, cow we bought young, and 88 is a 2-year-old, and the next year she got into the top 6 at Madison and progressed all the way to winning World Dairy Expo as a 150,000-pound cow. And then the bottom side with Doc, I think our prefix says it all with her. It has it all. She's production. She's type, genomics. She stood right at the top of the class with some of the best cows in the world. I'm confident this bull's going to do exactly what we need in making balanced cows that will work for everyone.
Well, in your involvement with both sides of the pedigree, Mike, I don't think anybody in the industry has released a bull with this many champions, this many All-Americans, or 95 or 96 point cows. Can you think of anything like it of recent?
Tattoo on the top side, Dam being reserve All-American, Grand Dam being All-American. Tattoo, he's pretty special to us. He's been #1 confirmation bull in Canada, and actually I looked him up this morning. He's running 96% good plus or better on almost 900 milking daughters in Canada, and 39 of them are excellent. Now, I don't know of any other bull that's that high of a percentage of good plus or better. And then Doc, unfortunately we don't have Doc. She's gone a little too soon, but she was an extraordinary cow. A cow that calve in, milk 140, and she'd go dry giving 120, and bred back, just a great cow to work with day in, day out.
Well, and to continue the story a little bit, Kevin Jorgensen, you've been a sire analyst for years. I love to call you a senior sire analyst because it makes me feel young. But Select Sires, Kevin, has been instrumental in both sides of this pedigree. Would you take us through a little bit of the impact that the sire of Hendrix, Tattoo, has had on the Select Sires world?
Well, it's great to be with you guys and just a pleasure to talk about a bull that's always been near and dear to me. We've had such a great relationship with Mike and Julie for a really long time, both in acquiring bulls as well as their being such a great partner for us at Genetic Futures. And I had the opportunity to take over Showcase in 2015. And we were sort of in a transition period, for lack of a better term. We had these great bulls like Atwood and Goldchip and Bradnick, and they were hitting towards the twilight of their career, and we knew we needed to transition to something else. And I just remember distinctly one day being up at Mike and Julie's, and I said to Mike, very early in my career as a sire analyst, that we really need to try and make something out of Treasures. Just a cow that, for me, was such a. Everyone talks about James Rose, but I'm not sure there's ever been a Holstein cow with a better udder than Treasure. Just day in, day out, no matter when you saw her, whether it was at the show, whether it was at the farm. Cow just I was a great admirer in the maternal line. I knew very well as well. So come along a year or so later, Tokyo second at Madison and milking yearling, and when the bull had the opportunity to when he got his first genomic results, I remember calling Mike and saying, here's the treasure son that maybe we've been looking for. I've always been an admirer of putting the right combinations together. And you mentioned, Tim, you put Dorman through Crush and then Cheyenne, and you put all these together. It just seemed like the right combination, and having Goldchip in there and Chastity. So it just kind of fit together. And so immediately from the bull's release, he had a great first career, what I would say is a genomic young bull. And as those heifers continued to impress people, and then, a couple of years ago at Madison, I mean, he had to be within spitting distance of being premier sire. And so he's just had this secondary career, and Mike mentioned his stats and doing so well in Canada. And he was a bull that kind of sent us in the direction we've been in Showcase, which is more balance. He was never the number one PTAT bull in the US, but he just had all the right traits. He had the right mastitis resistance, which I still believe in health and fitness traits in our high type bulls, because those cows need to not have issues. And so that was just he's been a great fit for us, and now to have one of his sons out of a cow that we're pretty fond of as well in Doc, I think is a really neat deal.
I'd note, Key-Joe, as to follow up on your comments, somatic cell on Hendrix is under 3 and DPR is 0, which is quite unique in this world. Type gets to nearly 3 points. So, Key-Joe, all the things you lined up in this pedigree sure have come through in the data on the bull. SSI has had a huge influence on the bottom side of this pedigree. Tell us a little about how you've been involved with Doc 87, 84, and just a quick recap of your involvement at SSI with that cow.
Well, again, it's a partnership between us and Mike and Julie from the day that we bought Jedi Have Not. Bought her from Tommy Kugler in a sale, and she went up to GF to have her juvenile career to make embryos for us. And she was just a great cow because she came with one horn and one eye, and Megan loved her, and she was just a great cow, good donor. At that same time, as I talked about transition period, we'd also brought Doc in as one of the early Showcase bulls as well in my tenure. A bull that was somewhat controversial because he was a late King Boy son. His mother's a Shamrock Mac. The next dam was a Snowman, but he went back to Debutante Ray and the Roxys. And I had wanted to use this bull very, very heavily as a sire father, and I kind of joked with Jeff, well, you should have not to Doc. And so that flush materialized, and we ended up with 2 heifers and 2 bulls. And the 2 bulls, one of them is one of our most successful bulls in Brazil named Doc Nido. And then we had a bull in the accelerated product lane named Doc Hollywood. And that bull, ironically, mirrors a lot of the same things that Doc has done. He's a 1,400-pound milk bull that's 2 points on type, very solid, plus on DPR. So he had a good career. Unfortunately, we lost him as a young bull up at Westby. But then there was those 2 magical daughters. And 87, 83, I went through the National Convention sale when it was here in Wisconsin, and the other one left, and Mike was pretty fond of her, and we got her. Mike and Julie took ownership of the cow, and I guess the rest we can say is history, because she's just been such a prolific cow, the ability to be truly a crossover cow of the industry. And there's a very short list of those cows that do that. And I would say the last cow to do it is our other guest that's with us in terms of Della herself was one of those cows 30 years ago that was a crossover cow that made high bulls for AI, could win at the highest levels. And so it's interesting how history repeats itself.
Well, great lead in to introduce our next guest, which is Frank Regan of Regan Crest Farm. Regan Crest has become an iconic breeding establishment all over the world. Frank Regan and his family have developed tremendous cow families, and Mike and Kijo, when you can say one guy has been the guy behind Della and certainly Durham Barbie, that's a mouthful. Because there's not many breeders that can boast impact on our genetic world like Frank Regan. So Frank, we welcome you to our podcast, and it's great to have you. Tell us a little about what's going on at Regan Crest today.
Well, thanks for the kind words, Tim. That's you're lucky to own a cow like her, and I realize that. Getting back to this, we had some rainy weather in the summer. We decided to take off a day and go to the Wisconsin Championship show. We got there probably about 12:30, and the 2-year-olds were just in the ring. And my dad was with me, and I seen this black 2-year-old come around that would catch your eye. And you had to love the udder. It was high, wide, and shallow, and great legs. And that day she placed second and best udder. So after the show, I followed her back to whoever owned her, which was Bob Snow. I kind of asked him about her, and I guess I kind of realized that we probably couldn't afford that cow at that time. I put in for a Black Star daughter. That was kind of how I got to know the cow and got to talking with Bob, and he took her home, flushed her, and about a year and a half later, I went to a friend's sale up in Wisconsin, and it was pretty close to where Bob lived. And I thought I'd stop in and take a look at her. I think it was like in November, and she was due right around Christmas. I went in there, and Bob was there in the barn, and she was standing in a stall dry at that time. And, she was long enough that she stood over the gutter. Bob had a grate there over the gutter, so she wouldn't, have to stand in it. And I told Bob, I said, Bob, I'd just make a pen for her if you can, because, the further they get along and going to calve, the harder it is for them to get up. So Bob made a pen there in the corner, and I knew she was due in right around December to start winking. I guess that was it for a while, but, she was a Mark Bell cross. And I had been talking with Charlie Will at the time there at Slackton. He kind of liked that cross too. We kind of waited, until maybe, I guess it was right before spring show. Bob had her entered. I looked at her, and he said he was going to sell her after the show. So we made a deal on her, and I guess that day she was grand champion and best bred and owned and best udder of the show. So she had a pretty good day to start out our career. But after that, we took her home, and about a week later, the Japanese were there. They wanted to buy 2 bulls out of her. That always made a guy feel a little better about buying a cow like that, because we hadn't had much experience with it before, and that kind of made you feel better anyway. After the show there, they wanted us to take her up to, you got a question here, how was she to work with? She was full of life. We took her up to Gay's Mills there. They took some pictures for the Wisconsin News. They took the halter off her, and I thought, wow, how's that going to work? By golly, they got the picture taken, and it took us about 20 minutes to catch her. Luckily, there was a place there where there was a corner in the fence, and we could catch her. But one of the things I liked about the cow, she had a tremendous udder, but she had great legs to go with it, and on the cement all the time, I think is pretty important.
Well, and she sure has passed that on, Frank, generation after generation. That's a great story where the cow came from. And the Mark Bell cross, the 4 of us on the podcast remember that cross and how powerful it was, and how Charlie Will, would have loved that cross. and there were so many great cows. As far as her conformation, you've talked about her udder. I certainly remember her frame, with a tremendous rump and width. Frank, would you say that was another trait that has really come through on the cow?
Yeah, when you got behind her, you love that wide, wide rump and that high wide rear udder. I think that's kind of what it took to get them cows with high wide rear udders. You get a narrower rump and you get a narrower udder for the most part.
And interestingly, Frank, and I don't know I know you've seen Doc 87, 84 at Mike's and in the sale and all. When you think about it, Mike, it's 10 generations ago that Della started this family. And I'd like you to compare your notes on 87, 84 to Frank's comparison of Della. Because to me, as being involved with both cows at some level, it's almost spooky, the comparisons and the similarities. You want to talk a little about how that works for you?
There's a lot of similarities on both sides of this bull's pedigree with Treasure and Doc, but we'll start with Doc. I think Doc resembles Della to a T. Just she's got that massive wide rump and all the capacity, and just there's a lot of grit in Doc 8784. I mean, a lot of people don't realize this, but she grew up most of her life in a 2,500 cow facility, running right with the rest. She was not a pampered young animal. Later in life, obviously, she moved from Genetic Futures to here, but I think cows need that grit, the toughness to survive in any facility. And then you jump up to the top side of this. There's always a reason they always put the big heavier set guy on Durham Treasure, because I was about the only one that could hold her down. There was a lot of spunk in Treasure. When we bought her as a 2-year-old, you couldn't even clip her ears. And she was Durham, and so there's a lot of toughness, great udders on both sides, and I think that's coming right back from 10 generations ago.
And Frank, I've heard you talk about Della and her muzzle and the way she eats. And one of the coolest things about Doc, once we got involved with her, Mike, was watching Logan feed her at night and seeing nothing but her ears as she buried her head. Frank, was Della one of those cows you love to watch eat? Great cowmen like to watch cows eat.
Yeah, she was. She had a great appetite. I'll tell you, the only time we ever had any trouble, she had. She was up there in Sparta, and she must have drank some sand in that the springs up there or whatever. But we had to do a surgery on her, and after that, though, she was right back to normal. So she had a tremendous will to live.
Well, Frank, tell us a little more about the family and a few of the daughters. You mentioned Black Star and Winkin and some of that. Tell us about 3 or 4 of her favorite daughters that you were involved with.
They were all really good cows. I mean, even that Winkin, I didn't care for that calf, but she went 94 at, for Hadwin Kleiss and made really good records. It just seemed like whatever bull you used on her, even there was a couple of trifectas that were really good cows. But Melwood, what we've got right now in our herd here goes back to the Melwood Della. I mean, we have a 93 Iota that's got over 300 out with 3 excellent Montroses, and then a great Granite daughter that's a really good young cow, a lot like Della. We've had the Leadmans there with Leadman Dolly that had patron Debbie Joe. I don't know if you guys remember that cow, but Simons and Rounds has bought her as a calf and developed her. And then there was a Leadman Doris that also went excellent for a friend over here in West Union, Iowa. We had Max, we had Rudolph, we had Elton with Desriel there, which goes to Cookie Cutter and Seamers, Durham and Dante. And then, of course, we had, the Encores. There was Dundee, and he had another brother there that Select had, Dawson's. Dundee was originally supposed to went to Select, but they merged with Sire Power, so they didn't want him at that time. But we had 3 other excellent daughters, and John Irvson had the mother of Damien, and we had Black Star Darlene that had the 95-point Jet Deborah that was really a great cow here for us. So it just seemed like any bull you could use Belle Elton on her, or you could use Encore on her, or and they were good cows. I mean, they all had good legs and udders.
That is a tremendous pedigree lesson. You know, guys, we all know every one of these cows, but you forget about Debbie Joe, and you forget about the Jed, Deborah cow, and all the great black stars. Frank, you brought up a couple bulls that, you know, one thing Mike and I have talked about, there were bulls that were absolute great bulls in the pedigree. And just quickly tell us, I think is probably her two most famous sons, and I think they've influenced select sires, and they've influenced Tim Abbott's life, would be Dundee and Durham. Tell us a little bit about the impact those bulls have had in your world.
They're bulls that both done a good job. The Dundees had just a little more depth, but you take them good Goldwins are mostly out of Dundee, so that proved that he could add to the pedigree. And Durham, of course, they were the kind of cattle that could go anywhere. And so, but they done us a good job, and I think for the most part, everybody in the industry liked them.
You bet. And I think they put Regan Crest prefix on the map, and then allowed you to do some other things with your breeding program. As a student of the breed and a sire analyst, interestingly, Durham is on, you know, really two sides of this pedigree, or Della is. You know, tell us your view of that, and then tell us a little about 11 generations of sires. We've talked a lot about the females. I get all fired up about how many great bulls are in the pedigree. You want to hit the double Della and the sire stack.
Absolutely, and the actually triple Durham if you take Debbie or Barbie back to the gold chip side. And Durham is always going to be number one in my heart as probably the greatest bull in my career that I've had the chance to see daughters or work with, and it mirrored my career here at Select Sires very, very closely. I came to Select Sires just shortly before Durham was released back in 1998. I remember taking Ron Long to see 23 of them at one farm about 3 weeks after I started, and we actually went to go see daughters of the Darlene son when they mascot Dello, and we looked on these all Durham daughters, and I got in the car with Ron Long, and he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "These other ones were nice, but this bull's going to change the breed." To this day, 20 some years later, it's still the best daughter group I've ever seen out of one bull in the progeny test form. So he's always been really, really special to me because the careers line up. Additionally, you know, Frank was telling those stories about Della. The first time that I had the pleasure to meet you, Frank, was helping Willis Gunston 1991, the second year you brought Della to Spring Show. And she was reserve grand that day and was helping in the string. And I'll never forget the experience of clipping that cow's udder, of her needing to be in the chute. Someone had to tail her and someone had to hang on to her head, because that was a little bit like Mike saying that the treasure's built that way too. So that spunk that everybody talked about was definitely there. So the combination of all these bulls in the pedigree, and then with Jedi Have Not, Super Sire Miri, my cattle partner Mitch Brennick had the opportunity to milk her as a 2-year-old, and maybe one of the best young cows that we've ever had at Mystic Valley. So as you go all the way back there, and Disrael that Frank mentioned being Durham's full sister, you know, that cow bred on so true, and with Man Halo being a global cow of the year, just the pedigree that side. Then you go back to what we started with Treasure, the fact that that cow was just the combination together, I think, just makes for a really unique stack when you put this all together. And then having Doc there as well. Durham and Doc have had a lot of similarities or comparisons made to them. And I think where the comparison gets to, I said earlier about the controversy of Doc being a showcase bull with a Shamrock Mac Dam and a Snowman Grandam. Ironically, it was a little bit the same way when Durham first got released. People were like, there's no way that some double-bred Elton son or Bell son being an Elton can be who he is. And it was seeing is believing. And some of those early naysayers, once they saw the second crop daughters calve in, they came to the party and we welcomed them because it was okay. But they've had similar careers. I think the big difference and why Durham is always going to be so special to me, there's been no bull in this history, at least in my own opinion, that could take a 78-point cow and make her 94 like Durham could. It was his ability in one generation to do what he did. And he made a young evaluator look really smart. using a lot of them because he improved a lot of cows. But I just think it's a great combination of putting these two families together.
Joe, I would say, Durham had a huge impact in your life. Certainly Dundee did mine. Frank, the St. Jacobs board at the time, 5 farmers from Ontario that were passionate about breeding cows were lucky enough to acquire this bull, and Paul Trapp put the deal together with you. This bull single-handedly changed the lives of the members of the St. Jacobs organization, and I think helped Regan Crest a fair amount too. So Frank, when you think about Durham and Dundee, the impact they've had, and I think it's over $100,000 between the two bulls, maybe 120. Those two bulls and the impact they've had financially on Select Sire, St. Jacobs, Regan Crest. I don't know that there's been anything like it in this business. They're game changers.
Well, I think that she was a great investment for us anyway, because after we owned the cow, people just wanted bulls out of her, and we flushed her, and we didn't do it like we should have probably. With in vitro, we could have made more daughters, but we flushed her and then bred her back to try to show her again. And but I think today, if I'd have done things different, I'd have probably done more flushing. And but we'd usually flush them and maybe sell a daughter to help pay for the the cost and that. And it really worked out good for us because it spread the daughters out. They proved to be beneficial to these breeders.
And as a breeder, Frank, nothing more important than that. So hats off to you and your family at Regan Crest for, every time there's ever a competition of the greatest breeders in the world, Regan Crest gets on that list. And because of Della, and certainly because of Durham Barbie, so all connected to you. So as we wrap up our conversation today, we appreciate everyone listening. Hendrix is a bull that is available now at Select Sires. As I mentioned before, nearly 2,500 GTPI, nearly 3 points of type, nearly 2.5 points of udders, solid milk as Doc always does. I think the DPR at break even, stature not being extremely tall at 2.6. This bull can absolutely change the breed like a Durham and a Dundee have done. And Mike and I are thrilled with that. Our partners on Doc, you remember that day in June, I remember the day, June 11th in Rudolph, Wisconsin. We sat there and bid nearly $2 million on Doc. If Bob Snow would have charged you $2 million for Della, how would that have worked for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I think she could have paid for it. She's we done good with Dundee, of course, with you guys, and the bulls that we sold and the females that were in demand. It sure helps a breeding program. So I think it was very beneficial.
Well, I had to ask that question in case any of the partners on Doc or our wives are listening, Frank, just for your support. So thank you for that. Just to wrap up, give us your parting thoughts on how this bull or how Della can change the business, and how one bull can do that. As a master breeder, Frank, just wrap up your comments, if you would, with where you think this business is headed.
Well, I think that, milk prices aren't that great, but we still got to keep in mind to breed these good, profitable cows. These feet and legs on cattle are pretty important, and if he can put the legs on them, they'll be profitable. I hate to see a cow that's got a lot of potential, but her feet are bad enough that, she's not going to last. This young bull looks like, he can take care of that part of it.
Well, we thank you, Frank. Mike and I see you as an iconic person in this industry. We thank you for joining us. We've had a lot of good times over the years. I'm not going to go into all of them, Frank, for fear of incriminating you or I, but one of the greatest trips you and I have ever had together was traveling through Pennsylvania. And for our listeners, Frank would walk onto these farms, and there has never been a more humble breeder of great cows in the world, Frank. You're iconic, kind of a mentor to many of us. So it's been fun working with you, and thank you for being part of this important podcast.
Appreciate being part of it, and I hope this young bull can be as good as he looks.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Now, quickly to finish a couple other things. Joe, the bull's name is Hendrix. And we were just in Nashville, and up on a stage, got Kevin Jorgensen, with his guitar. And I think you shocked the world, Kevin. I've heard you do it before, but the some 300 people there stood there in awe as you tore up a guitar lick. So tell us about this bull's name and what that means to you, Kijo. I think you were involved in this.
Obviously, the one thing I do that doesn't have anything to do with cows is guitars and music. And as a young man, I picked up the guitar because of listening to guys like Jimi Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and that's still what I play today. So for me, it all starts with Hendrix. So why not start this bull right at the top?
Well, I hope he will have a career like your friend Hendrix. And Kijo, thank you, and thank you to all your people at Select Sires for making this cow family and bull what he is. Thanks for being on with us. And lastly, Mike, I'm going to finish up with you. Will you be using this bull at Duckett Holsteins, and tell us what our plans are for Showbox Sires with this bull?
We will be using him here. We actually used him this morning. A bull that I just got all the confidence in the world. As we sit here and listen to Frank talk about the things Della done for him, that's Doc and Treasure's done for us. They're real cows from real farms, and they can do that for all the people in the world. For Showbox, we've got some Hendrix pregnancies coming from different cows that have done really well showing, and cows Footloose has got pregnancies coming by Hendrix. There's a few daughters of Blexy that's got some going to have some pregnancies coming, and I think we're going to mate him to a few more to try to get a few special sons. But I'm looking forward to Hendrix. There's two full sisters here, and it's exactly what you'd expect. They're very correct, wide rumped, great legs. They're just a little over a year old now. Looking forward to getting them calved in. Any influence from Treasure, if they put the great udders like her and Doc have, I think they're going to be great young cows.
Well, this certainly has been fun. And on behalf of Showbox Sires and Dairy Business, we thank you for listening. I thank our guests, Mike Duckett of Showbox Sires and Duckett Holsteins, Kevin Jorgensen from Select Sires, and Frank Regan of Regan Crest Farms in Iowa. We produce these issues of podcasts on the evolution of the great cow to inform breeders around the world, not just from a numbers standpoint, but from a standpoint of who these bulls are, the bulls, the cows, and the people behind them. Because we talk about it, Showbox, we're about the cow families, but also the people that make this business great. So we thank you for listening and appreciate your time. And we will look forward to having you join us on future Showbox Sires Evolution of the Great Cow on Dairy Business.